50s. Really, really talented guy. These old rhythm and blues guys are mostly forgotten now. Uh, all right, so today we're going to do organizational culture. And before we get started on that, what happened to Republic Bank today? Who knows? Anyone follow that?
I saw that Chase, I think they took over
Correct. Yeah, JP
the
Morgan.
first one. Yeah.
Very good. So that averted yet another bank failure. And what's causing all the bank failures? Who knows? Why were there several bank failures?
Inflation.
Hmm?
Inflation is
Related.
impacting.
How so? What's the connection between?
They're having a run on cash. Is it that people are pulling out their cash?
Yes. Okay. So basically, what is the Federal Reserve Bank doing to stop inflation?
They're raising interest rate in order to mitigate the spend and the
Very
influx
good.
of capital in the
Okay.
economy.
Very good. So the Fed's raising the interest rate to stop inflation because the way they do that is they take money out of the system. So if there's more money and then they reduce it to less money, then that raises the interest rate. But it also takes money out of circulation and it reduces the prices. The price increases anyway. So they're doing that, but the problem is that the banks a lot of banks bought long-term bonds that they're holding. So if the interest rate goes up, the value of those long-term bonds goes
Goes
down.
down. Mhm.
Okay. That means they don't have the reserves to pay their depositors. When the depositors hear about that, that's when you get what happened at Silicon Valley Bank, a run on the bank. I think something similar happened with Republic Bank, I believe. So basically, there was a run on the bank, and a run on the bank means people start withdrawing the money. That then causes a bank failure if they can't give back the money to the depositors. So banking is inherently unstable, and part of the way that the government has addressed that is through the insurance system. There's something called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and they insure your bank deposits up to 250,000. So when you let's say you have a few thousand in the bank or less, that's insured. So you won't lose that. Okay. But let's say you are a company. What happened at Silicon Valley Bank was that a lot of the tech firms in Silicon Valley had deposits with them, and it wasn't small amounts. It was their payroll or the investment they had received from the venture capital industry. So these large deposits were kept in really an unsafe way. And when they got wind that there were problems, the incompetent management, and incidentally, the Federal Reserve Bank recently admitted that they were in part their regulation of the banks has been remiss, has not been good, and so a lot of the problem was because of the bad regulatory practices. It wasn't just that the banks were run by clowns, but the regulators were clowns also, and so. This has resulted in the string of bank failures. Now, you could say, well, why is the Fed raising interest rates? And the answer to that is quite simple, that prices have gone up in the past year by 5%. by almost a little under 5% now. Last a few months ago, it was going up at 6%. So if you have prices going up that fast, you have people getting upset about the rapidly increasing prices. And it's been hard enough for people who haven't had wage increases. If you adjust for inflation, wages haven't increased since the 1970s, since the early 70s. And if you're trying to support a family and food prices go up 10%, the food prices and oil prices went up a lot more. Now, it's true that inflation has been abating, but there's a serious question as to what's going to happen to the oil price. It's gone down somewhat, but the government, the Biden administration, has been selling oil. There's a huge pool of oil that the government has called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and they've been selling that oil to keep the oil price down. When those sales stop, you're going to also be into this. We're going to see the summer driving months when people go on vacations by car and things like that, and so you might see. I don't know what the future will bring it, but you might see spikes in the oil price, which could bring back inflation. So this issue with the rising interest rates could continue. So hopefully there'll be corrections. Now, one of the things the Fed did, and I'll finish this up. Okay, don't worry, I'm still doing preliminary stuff. So one of the things the Fed did to save the banks was that they opened up the lending window and reduced the interest rate for banks. And so the banks can borrow for a year at a sharply reduced rate. What they said is that they'll take the face value of any bond and treat it as though the face value is the true value, and they'll lend them that money. And that makes the interest rate much lower. So what you saw in the first quarter was a massive tech rally. Drawing these kind of relationships is always sketchy, but you can't help but suspect that the tech rally was related to this loosening of interest rates indirectly through the banks. And what will be the effect on inflation if they're reducing the money supply with one hand and increasing it via lending to the banks in the other hand? Who knows what the effect of that's going to be. So it's kind of an interesting situation, and one that has not yet been resolved. Now, the Fed is going to meet in a few, I think it's next week, and or is it this week? Maybe a few days, and they're going to decide on what interest rate to set, and they're going to probably raise it by 0.25% again, which is a big increase. I mean, that's a significant increase. Will we see inflation falling down to the 2% target that they have stated? I doubt it. But if they don't stop the increases, you could see more bank failures. So they might wait for a while. If they say there's not going to be any more rate increases, you're going to see the stock market going up. We'll see what occurs. But this is a very odd period. All right. So today we're going to talk about.
Professor, just a question. If they do not raise the interest rate and the stock market benefits, inflation still is going to impact the larger society. So they have to figure out how to really kind of.
There's an expression they use called the soft landing. And the idea is that you just raise interest rates enough to stop inflation, but not so much that you cause a recession. But sometimes that goal is elusive, and some people argue, well, the amount they've raised interest rates already will be enough to stop inflation. Other people like Larry Summers, the famous Harvard economist and policy guy, he said you have to raise interest rates above the inflation rate, and the inflation rate is still higher than the interest rate. So according to his view, if you stop now, there will be more inflation. What's also going on is that they're saying they're raising interest rates, but then creating money to give to the banks that are in trouble. So that's creating money too. So, that makes it even more complicated. All right. So today we're going, so you could see, if they stop raising rates, that's what happened to Paul Volcker in 1980, was that he started raising rates, and all the politicians, they hate it when the Fed raises rates because it means unemployment. People don't like that. So they started attacking the Fed, which went on a little already with Powell. And then he relented, he gave in and started reducing rates, and then inflation roared back right away. And it became a lot worse, and he had to raise the rates a lot higher. The result was 20% interest rates back then. Most of you, I don't think any of you are old enough to remember that. I remember it very well. I was a student then in my MBA program, and there was a huge recession as a result in the early 80s. So this could repeat itself. Who knows? People always it's always like, I want to end my diet sooner, but if you end your diet sooner, then you don't lose the weight. This is the problem. And then you have to diet even more later on. That's the kind of thing. So in any case, today, now that almost everyone's here, I said that your discussion board on 12 o'clock high is due on Wednesday, not today, because I just collected the one last Wednesday, so I want to give you a little breathing room. So the final discussion board is due on Wednesday. And today we're going to talk about culture. We probably won't finish it, but we'll finish culture next time and get into HR. HR, you did the Moneyball thing. I put that a little ahead. But basically, Moneyball is really about HR. And I'll talk a little bit about my ideas. That's my field. I have a PhD in it. I taught it a lot. And, I've done research in it, and I did my doctoral dissertation on employee benefits, which is part of HR. HR is a very broad field. It covers a lot of unrelated topics. And I wrote an article that got published in the leading management education journal, Academy of Management, Learning and Education, years ago, that argued that we're not doing a good job of teaching HR, that the HR education hasn't really kept pace with the field. And I'm afraid that the field has had problems too. So that's a whole big can of worms and big topic in itself. But in any case, today we're talking about organizational culture. And organizational culture, one textbook I used to use called it Collective Mental Programming. Another view is your book says it's a system of shared meaning held by an organization's members that distinguishes the organization. The system is characterized by beliefs and assumptions which filter what employees perceive, are manifested as symbols, and form the foundation for shared meaning among members. A number of people have written, I enjoy the topic of organizational behavior. I was intrigued by the concept. Now, one thing I should start out by saying is that a lot of this stuff we've been talking about, I think, reduces the importance of organizational behavior. Just as technology has been changing organization structure, it's also reducing the importance of organizational culture, because the reason is that you don't need the kind of highly integrated, cohesive organization you used to need in companies. A lot of companies, I was talking last time how the technology enables outsourcing, it enables a core company to have, even at the core, to have gig workers who are less closely tied to the company. So the role of organizational culture is probably diminishing because of these things. It's also true, I mean, but in a way, a lot of this may mean that they need to do more things to increase the culture, because a lot of the things I'm describing means that the culture becomes more divergent and less cohesive. And so if you have a lot of people working at home on their computer, and doing, what we're doing like distance work, then how do you tie them all together? And so you need some things to tie them together. As I said last time, Lawrence and Lorsch argued that differentiation should be matched by a coextensive degree of integration. And so firms that are more differentiated will need to be more integrated. But if you have everyone working at home, then you need a lot of integration. And that's one of the things I don't think the companies, or for that matter, colleges, I don't think Brooklyn College has dealt with that question either, or any of the other colleges. Okay, the Fed meetings this week, as someone wrote, good. So basically, organizational culture is an important building block, and I think I mentioned this already, but if you look at Tushman and O'Reilly's model in the book Winning Through Innovation, what you have is like a core of the company, and that's influenced by a number of items, which I think I've mentioned, but one is technology or the task, the nature of the task, which affects how the organization needs to be designed. Another is the structure of the organization. We talked about that last time, the span of control and the visualization. And third of all, the human resource management, which I'll talk about next time. And fourth of all, the culture. And these should all fit together. Now, all of these should be responsive to the business strategy, which should shape in many ways all these organizational factors. But in turn, the organizational factors should influence the strategy. So it's endogenous. The economic term in econometrics is endogenous, that the variable and the predictor variable and the dependent variable are coextensive. And so basically you could say Alfred Chandler said that strategy follows structure, but Carl Weick argued that structure follows strategy. Okay, so there's integration of these different concerns, and you can't say one without the other. Certainly, if you look at the large, very large corporations, like we looked at Disney, for example, I would say Disney adjusts to the entertainment market and tries to think of ways to compete given the entertainment market. But the things Disney does in turn influences the entertainment market. and changes how people are affected by the entertainment market. So now, so all of these variables, including the culture, the structure, the human resource management, the technology, interact with the culture, and of course, need to be responsive to the environment. Okay, and there's definitely if for these mega companies like Walmart, there's definitely give and take between what the company does from a management level and what the environment is, because they're so big. Everyone ended up copying Walmart. Everything Walmart did was then copied by the other big box stores and even non-big box stores. So I'm saying that there's often interaction in these very large companies, not small competitive firms, but in the large companies. And so all of these things then interact. Let me draw a little arrow here. Interact to affect not job, but firm performance. Okay, now one of the things that when I teach HR, I also say this, but here it's a little broader. I say that HR should match the business strategy. Here, I'm saying that all of these factors, all of the management factors, technology, culture, human resource management, and structure, should match the strategy, which in turn should interact well and match, of course, the environment. So all of these things are interactive. Okay, so basically the idea of culture is that you want a culture that helps the firm function effectively. And so if you've got a shared system of beliefs, you've got a bunch of people all thinking in the same way. What you want to have is that the way they're thinking should be to make the company more successful, and to be efficient and to worry about shareholder value and things like that. So basically, William Ochi was a professor at UCLA. He may still be there. It's a long time ago I was there, but he may actually still be there. A lot of these professors teach until they drop. And he wrote a book in the early 80s called Theory Z. Let me clear all this. And the idea of Theory Z is that the Japanese companies at that time were, I'm going to check whether he's still teaching there. It says is, so according to Wikipedia, he's still teaching there. He's 80 years old. But he's still there, still at UCLA. So he's what he said is basically in an article, not in Theory Z, but what Theory Z was about was that at that time, the Japanese companies were out competing the American companies. And a lot of the old line traditional companies, the really wonderful old time Eastman Kodak and IBM, they were doing where I work, Johnson and Johnson was one of them. We're facing a great deal of stress from the Japanese, and in particular, it wasn't so much pharmaceuticals and computers as it was the car companies and the electronics companies. So companies like RCA and things like that were really getting blown out of the water, TV sets. And you'll notice now I'm looking at my TV set, it's made by Samsung, a Japanese company. Back in the day, when I was a kid, we had American made TVs, Zenith and RCA, and everyone was upset that all the American companies were closing or being bought up, and they were being replaced by the big Japanese manufacturers. In the auto business, it was Honda, Toyota and all that. And Ochi looked at the Japanese companies and he said, what is it about them? Now, there are a couple of things that they had adopted that enabled them to become more successful and build better quality products. And these were, in particular, total quality management and lean manufacturing. But one of the things he noticed in addition to this was that they put a greater emphasis on HRM, on human resource management, and also that they had very, very strong organizational cultures. And there was huge conformity pressure. And he argued that all of these human resource building blocks were being used more effectively by the Japanese. So you could say the task, the TQM, total quality management, and lean manufacturing, the culture was much stronger. The human resource management, they had lifetime employment. So all of these things were contributing to the success of the Japanese companies versus the American companies that weren't able to compete on the basis of quality. So the idea was that what Ochi talked about when it came to culture, and he wrote about this in an article in Administrative Sciences Quarterly, that he said there are basically three kinds of relations. And some of this comes from sociology, attorneys, and so on. And these are associated with control systems. So attorneys argued that there were Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. Those are two German terms that mean like community relations and market relations. Basically, this idea was that it had, believe it or not, had to do with World War I, because like everybody was in the beginning of World War I, they celebrated the beginning of the war, believe it or not. It was almost one of horrible wars in history, really ugly, horrible, bloodthirsty war. But these people are so happy that, oh, now we have community because we're all going to fight. So there's a community. So that's much better. And then like 20 million people got killed and another 20 million were maimed. And people were actually celebrating this, astonishing. So, but in any case, this idea of Ochi is that there are, first of all, market relations. So this would be, attorneys, Gesellschaft. And then there were bureaucracies. And this would be associated with the sociologist Weber, who was the first to identify, Max von Weber was the first to identify bureaucracy. And thirdly, clans, which was similar to the Gemeinschaft, but not exactly. It's just a slightly different concept. But what Ochi said is that there's control systems appropriate to each one. So market relations. So you go to store and you buy a tomato, or you buy a house. The relation, or you get onto a website. The relation is contract. And so you sign a contract and you agree to each other. Now, the thing about contract is that it has high transactions costs. When you do it online, it's not a problem because they have one contract for everybody. So in a way, the contract, when you go online and you get on a website, that's more like a bureaucracy. But the idea of a contract is you have a separate contract for each party. So it costs a lot, and that results in high transactions costs. The idea of transactions costs is that it's the cost of doing business. And so markets generate relatively high transactions costs, but the thing is, they're flexible. The trouble with markets is that if you have a large number of parties, you have to duplicate the contract so that the transactions costs become more expensive. So to reduce the transactions costs, what you might do is set up a bureaucracy, and the rules in a bureaucracy govern behavior. So instead of a one-time contract, you have rules that apply to everybody, and that greatly reduces the transactions costs. So if you look at kind of what these three relations do, they reduce as you go down the ladder. They reduce the transactions costs. I'm having trouble. Okay. Oh, actually, I wanted text. Okay, they reduce the transactions costs. The transactions costs go down as you move from a contract to rules to the control system for culture, for clans, which is culture. Okay, so in a clan, you know, a clan being like a tribe or a Stone Age hunting band or something like that. You have a group of people who have certain rules and traditions. And what Ochi is trying to communicate is that this kind of pattern exists in corporations as well. So what he's saying is that it's just like if you go to study a tribe in the Amazon forest, you know, you're an anthropologist and you go to study a tribe in the Amazon forest, and you know, some anthropologist says, oh, this is what they believe about the gods, and this is how they believe that fertility occurs, and so on and so forth. And you know, they tie all this together, and it's the culture that in the same way you can study a company and look at what the company believes and the belief systems, and then the management can use these belief systems to motivate the employee base and get them to all buy in. So your book characterizes, it applies the competing values model, which was devised in a different context, to the idea of corporate culture. And so the clan culture is based on trust and affiliation. And that's sort of the type that Ochi talks about. But I think he meant the idea of culture to apply to all of these to a degree. As well, adhocracy is that the culture is based on change, and employees value growth, stimulation. Maybe some of the tech companies are like this. Market-based cultures, the culture is based on achievement. Employees value communication, competence, and competition. And I think there are a lot of corporations that have this mindset. And hierarchy is where the culture is based on stability. Employees also value communication, formalization, and routine. And so basically you can study the type of culture, whether there's a fit to the environment, and how it correlates with performance. So the organizational culture inventory is a methodology, a survey instrument that groups cultures into A, constructive values that value affiliation, encouragement, and achievement. B, passive defense cultures that are conventional and value affiliation. And aggressive defense cultures that are competitive and power oriented. And another instrument is the organizational culture profile that has, in contrast to the culture inventory that has 3 dimensions. The organizational culture profile has 8 dimensions that looks at innovation, attention to detail, decisiveness, team orientation, outcome orientation, aggressiveness, supportiveness, and the rewards emphasis. So you can study cultures using these instruments and try to tie them into whether the company's performing well or whether it isn't performing well, and which type of characteristics characterize good performance in which industry, things like that. The dominant culture expresses the core values that are accepted throughout the corporation. So if you look at, say, the dominant culture of Brooklyn College, there's probably some attributes such as good teaching, interest in research publication, commitment to good education, things like that, whatever they may be, that characterize the core values of Brooklyn College. You could say the same thing of any company. At J&J, there was a credo where the guy that, I'll show it to you, the guy that, not the guy that founded J&J, but the grandson of the founder was a general. And he's the one that made it into the huge corporate. It was already a big, company. I'm just trying to look at where the credo is. I would have thought it would be on their website. I don't see it here. This website's a mess. The J&J credo. Okay, here it is. Oh no, it still doesn't give it to me. All right, here, this looks like it. All right, so the guy that founded J&J was the grandfather, the guy that really built it into I think it was a family, like a couple of brothers or something. But the guy who really built the company was this general, and he was the grandson, and he was a reserve general. I think he fought in World War II, and he revamped the culture. He created the credo, which has been updated over the years, and he set up the decentralized form of organization that I was talking about last time. And he set up these core values, and you can see it right on my screen here. And they say, we believe our first responsibility is to the patients, doctors, and nurses, to mothers and fathers, and to all others who use our products and services. In meeting their needs, everything we do must be of high quality. We must constantly strive to provide value, reduce our costs, and maintain reasonable prices. Customers' orders must be serviced promptly and accurately. Our business partners must have an opportunity to make a fair profit. And they go through similar type of stuff. We're responsible to employees. They must have a sense of security. Compensation must be fair and adequate. They say we're responsible to the communities in which we live and work, to the world community. We must be good citizens. And our final responsibility is to our stockholders. So you'll notice, and this is how it was when I was there too. They've changed it around a little, but our final responsibility, and this is how it was even in General Johnson's time in the 1940s, our final responsibility is to our stockholders. Business must make a sound profit. We must experiment with new ideas. Research must be carried on, innovative programs developed, investments made for the future, and mistakes paid for. New equipment must be purchased, new facilities provided, and new products launched. Reserves must be created to provide for adverse times. When we operate according to these principles, our stockholders realize a fair return. Now, does this really guide them? I think the answer is yes and no. I think it does express a core value system that many of the executives do believe in. There was a crisis, I may have mentioned it already, in the early 80s. I happened to be working there at the time, where a madman or woman, no one knows who it was injecting poison, cyanide, into Tylenol capsules. Yes, Raquel.
Yeah, Professor. So I see what you're talking about. In theory, it's what should happen, but it's not actually what happens in the culture of most organization. So normally their mission, their mission and their proposed outline for what the culture should be is not always what's adopted all the way down.
That's a good
And I
point,
don't see a
Raquel.
solve for that. And that was similar to Moneyball, where Peter and Billy were kind of doing their own thing, and then it was not only until they involved the other people to make it more holistic, making it more of a participant of everyone, that it really began to work.
Excellent.
So most organizations are like Billy and Peter at the beginning. They don't involve others. I mean, it's
Yes, yeah, it's a very complex situation. Very good, Raquel. Excellent. Yeah, what I was going to just say about J&J was that somebody was injecting Tylenol was injecting a cyanide into the Tylenol capsules, and a number of people died. And this created a furor, and a lot of people thought the Tylenol brand was killed. What they did was they looked to the credo. Jim Burke, the chairman at that time, looked to the credo and said, "This is what it says we should do." And this is what they did. They recalled the Tylenol capsules, all of them. Every bottle of Tylenol in America was liquidated. It cost them several $100 million to do it at that time. Today would be closer to probably close to $750 million. And they reissued Tylenol using a more secure bottle. And now the packaging that you get on almost everything, where there's elastic around the cap, that's where that started from. They invented that started from that incident, from the Tylenol crisis. And so they adhered to they saved the brand. Tylenol continued to be a profitable brand. In another case that we're learning about now, if you reading the papers, you might see it, is that they had another product called baby powder, and their baby powder and also shower to shower caused cancer. And rather than disclose the risks and take responsibility, they hid it, even though they knew the harm it caused. So as Raquel says, they did not comply with their own credo. And this often happens. Okay, so there's always going to be a difference between the formal organization and the informal organization, between what the company says is the goal and what really happens. Take the case of juries. There's nowhere in the law creating juries that anyone said that juries should be guided by racism or by vindictiveness or by hate. But very frequently juries have been. This is well known. If you saw the great classic movie To Kill a Mockingbird, you know this. And certainly there's a lot of history about it. It's not just in the movie. I mean, you can read in the history books. But if you watch the movie 12 Angry Men, which I assigned in my other class, not in this class, and you look at the group dynamics, what occurs there is that the jury has to be convinced to abide by the norms of a jury. Two good films, yes. I haven't taken attendance yet. So basically, it was probably the rule, not the exception, that the jury doesn't abide by the law, and doesn't do the right thing. It doesn't follow reasonable doubt in a criminal trial. That's the role of a jury. So the law is not always accepted and not always adhered to. And that's similar to organizational culture. The culture of a country is often similar. And you can criticize a company just like you can criticize a country. And you could say J&J didn't always abide by its standards. America didn't always abide by the Declaration of Independence that said all men are created equal. Okay, but if you start with those values, then you can begin to try to enforce them throughout the corporation. So basically what I'm saying is that core values are often imperfect and imperfectly communicated, but if they exist, they can be expanded and developed and integrated more into the company. And so the de facto, you're absolutely right, Raquel, that the de facto values are rarely as perfect as the statement of the formal values will be. But that statement becomes a target that the company tries to adhere to and is often imperfectly. If you look at the Japanese firms, there were several cases of major sexual harassment lawsuits in America concerning several of the major Japanese firms that Theory Z writes about. Now, of course, in these companies, their stated culture is not going to be, we commit sexual harassment, but these kinds of deviations will occur in any setting. And so all settings, nothing's perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. And so there's always deviation. And of course, the question is, how bad is the deviation? How bad is it? How bad is it? Not, is it perfect? You can't really set up a model where it's perfect. Like if you're advocating a system like communism that led to, between 10 and 50 million, depending on who you talk to, Russian people being murdered by the government, you say, oh, we should have a government like that because it's an improvement. It's false. It's not an improvement. It's worse. So basically, everything is relative, Raquel. I think there's a lot to your point, and it's a very complicated question. So basically, and you can see this just in the distinction between the dominant culture and the subculture. The core values that I've been talking about are the primary or dominant values. And when I worked at J&J, I was always angry. I said, how could they have this credo and do the crap they do, excuse me, through the French, that they do? It was always stuff that didn't adhere to the credo. And you can go back and find many cases, whistleblower at Ethicon that, they were dumping pollution and they fired her and so on and so forth. And, there were all kinds of cases where they violated it and they don't always live up to it. But, to the extent that it pushes them in that direction, it's a good thing. And then there's always subcultures within a company that violate the culture. In America, you had, before the Civil War, two subcultures, the Northern, well, you had more than that, but at least two, the Northern and the Southern. And the Northern lived up to the credo better than the Southern did. And they fought a war where a lot of people died, and it ended up the right one won, and that improved the culture. The worst subculture lost. Most people would agree. So basically, many cultures within an organization are typically defined by department designations or geographic separation, and they'll often be very different. So if you're at J&J and you go across the different companies, there are a lot of subcultures. And, that gets you back to the question, how does a company integrate the different deviant subcultures back into the big culture. And that gets us back to what I was talking about last time with Lawrence and Lorsch, who talked about integration and differentiation. And what they recognized is that the most successful companies have the appropriate degree of differentiation, but then those companies match the differentiation with the necessary integration that ties all the subunits together. So in a case like J&J, or even you could say the United States, each state has a separate culture to a degree. It's become less so with television and so on, but and internet, but each state has a slightly different culture, but you tie it together with a national culture. And the same thing would be true at J&J, where each organization might have a slightly separate subculture, and you tie it together with the culture of the company. Now, how does J&J do that? I think I mentioned last time that they have an annual or quarterly meeting of the directors of all the departments in each for instance, what I'm trying to say is they'll have a meeting of all the marketing heads of all the subunits. So they have the Council of Marketing Directors, and they'll meet in New Brunswick, where the headquarters are, the hotel there, and they'll all get to know each other, and they'll see what the headquarters is like, and they'll meet the top executives, and they'll share information. They'll have a council of personnel directors or HR directors, whatever they call it now, and they'll meet all together, and that ties the company together. Raquel, go ahead.
Yeah, so Professor, in theory, everything you're saying sounds good, and I keep going back to in theory. One of the apprehension I have with, I love HR, I love people, I love working with people and dealing with people, but I always question, does HR work? You know, it just seems like a broken chain where it works at one subset and then it breaks down, then it works at one subset, and it has been like that.
What do you have in mind specifically in HR that doesn't work? I'm not saying HR is like a model.
So you're talking about you talk about the creed that is out there, the mission statement or the target, and you find that a lot of senior management will echo that all the time. However, when you drill down into the company, you find that other leaders are not necessarily echoing that, and therefore what you receive, right, in terms of what that creed or target is supposed to be, it's never so. And when asked, why is that not happening? There's always some silly reason. But when you think about HR as a human resource that you should go to get a resolve, it doesn't work that way. It's always these loop of different things. And I don't want to go back to Moneyball, but I think it really kind of showed how what Billy was doing was kind of wrong. The way he treated the people in the beginning was just not right. But he had a great idea and he executed it and it worked. But the process in which it was done, it wasn't done well, the way he treated his team.
Very good.
So that's what I'm talking about. HR just doesn't seem to work for the people. It worked for the upper echelon in the company to kind of sell a brand. It's like you're selling a brand. If the ad works good and it looks pretty enough, we'll buy it, but it doesn't work.
You're right about that. HR is a very dubious thing. That the union people hate HR. They see it as a fraud. And in his famous book, Labor and Monopoly Capital, Max Braverman, who attended Brooklyn College for a year, was a Marxist, and he was highly critical of HR. You don't have to be left wing. I mean, I'm not. I'm also skeptical of. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think part of the problem. A guy named Dave Ulrich's a famous HR scholar, and he taught it. Again, I don't know if he's retired yet or not, but he taught for many years at the University of Michigan. And he wrote a book called Human Resource Champions. And he talks about the new functions of the HR department, that he argues that it had evolved from more of an administrative role to one that was involved in strategic planning and doing things that were meant to motivate employees and contribute to the bottom line. And that's all well and good, but I think HR always has trouble living up to its expectations. And the reason is that they're doing things that politically cross top management's prerogatives. In other words, they are the puppet of top management. And pretty much everything they do are things that top management will take an interest in. So whether it's hiring people, or how much you pay people, or who you fire, all of these things are emotionally connected to top management. And they're always going to play a role. So it's very, very difficult for HR to be anything other than the puppet of top management. And one of the things, so Ulrich in his book, he kind of paints this picture that HR is involved in business strategy, it's involved in organizational planning, it's involved in creating shareholder value, but it's also the employee's champion. And a moment's reflection will tell you that you can't possibly be both the employee's champion and creating shareholder value. That the employee's champion has to be someone other than the one focusing on employees' value, because it's not always going to be the case that taking care of the employees is what's going to create shareholder value. So there's always going to be this conflict between HR in its vehicle to represent employees, in its role to represent employees, and HR in its role to create shareholder value. And the union people have always hated HR for this very reason. Braverman called HR, I forget the terms he used, but he basically said it's ridiculous. It's window dressing, I think was the word he used. And it's nonsense. And other people in the labor movement going back used to say that HR is the velvet glove on the iron, the iron fist inside the velvet glove, or something like that. So basically that HR pretends to be employees' friend, but it's really enforcing the will of management. And this is true. I mean, they're not wrong. Okay, so employees, in America, we have an at-will employment system that people can be fired for any reason. And the core focus of the corporation is on shareholder value. Now, what that does is it makes the companies very efficient from an economic standpoint, but it has less of a employee-friendly result than what they're trying to do in Canada is say the companies owe a fiduciary duty to themselves, that the top management owes a fiduciary duty to the company. The trouble with that is that if you're an investor, if you've got $100,000 to invest, are you going to say invest it in a company that tells you, well, our first priority is our employees? Okay, are you going to do that? If you think about it, why would you? It's your money. It's your hard-earned money, or maybe not hard-earned money, but it's still your money. And you've got to decide what to do with it. And so the way the American system is set up is to make it easy for companies to attract capital. Now, what that does is it compromises the role of the employees, but the employees get something else. They get a job, because one of the effects of having a flexible capital system is that it's easy to start new companies compared to other countries. I'm not saying it happens every minute, but the very fact that you see ChatGPT forming, these things can form and unform because of the at-will employment system that America has. And if you do away with that, you do away with the innovative corporate formation, which would then say we become more like Europe, where there's much less innovation. Now, what that would mean is that you don't get ChatGPT, you don't get new drugs. You know, this idea that, well, we can do the things that Europe does, but we're going to have the same innovation that America has. This is, you know, you're on a narcotic. It's not possible. You do one thing or the other. And so it's very difficult to run companies with the stability that the German companies have for employees, or that the Italian companies have for employees, that also are market driven the way the US companies are. And that's why we have a more dynamic economy here. The result is that it's easier for young people to get jobs. You know, it's that simple. If the companies know that they can fire people, they're more likely to hire people, because it's not in Italy, if you try to start out at a job, there's no jobs, because they're so reluctant to hire people, because they know if they hire someone, they're going to work for forever. My wife's daughter got a job at a German company and then took sick leave, and she was in the waiting period, and they fired her because they knew that anyone who takes sick leave in the test period is a threat, that they might end up taking sick leave forever. And so in America, there's not that kind of system. You know, you can be fired for any reason, so companies are not as worried. But the companies mitigate that in many cases with these cultures. And I think what you're saying in part, Raquel, is that not all companies have strong cultures, and even the ones that do relatively, like J&J, don't necessarily live up to them. You know, and I gave you the example of the powder to powder, shower to shower, I mean, yeah. And that's going to be true. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And also, Professor, what I'm trying to say is that you can have both. You can have an HR that works for the people and also effectively work for the company. And it takes a strategy that involves an up and down approach, to be fair. And I'm saying it's broken because of dubious reasons, but it can work if they want it to work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, the sad truth is, Raquel, that there are very few really great managers out there. It's very, very rare. And there was once an issue, I may have mentioned this already, of Fortune, where they asked a lot of leading experts who are the 5 best managers of all time. And I looked over them, and there were a lot of interesting answers, but the one I was most interested in was Jim Collins, who had systematically studied a lot of great managers. And what interested me about his answer was that the 5 ones he picked, not one of them had gotten the job on their own. All 5 had either inherited the job, like Katharine Graham or George Merck, or somehow been placed in the job by circumstances. And when you think about it, what that tells you is that a lot of people want to become top managers because of their psychological needs, their need for power, their desire for money, success, whatever it may be. A lot of times it's the need for power. And that's a very, very different motivation from trying to do the best possible job. And that's why in what I talked about earlier in the semester is that Luthans and Rosencrantz wrote the book Real Managers, and they talked about the difference between successful and effective managers. And effective managers are people who communicate downward, who motivate their team, who care about human resources. And successful managers are people who network upward, who develop political relationships. And those are 2 totally different sets of skills. And so the people who reach the top, I once heard a quote, I've never been able to find it, but I once heard Napoleon, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but Napoleon quoted as saying, there are very few people who are big enough to be great managers, who are great great leaders who are small enough to become leaders. So in other words, to get to leadership role, you have to be very political. To be a great leader, you have to have the big picture and have a big vision and care about your employees and motivate them and be a servant leader that we talked about. And none of these things are ways that you become leader. So as a result, the cultures of organizations are often highly different from ideal. And a lot of these entrepreneurial companies are run, excuse the French, by a-holes, and that's going to happen a lot. One word in defense of that system is that it's better to have a lot of small companies that are run by such people that you can just quit and never see again than have a whole country run by such a person, as we saw with the totalitarian socialist systems that result in such a person controlling everybody. And this is Hayek's argument against socialism in the book, The Road to Serfdom, that it is impossible to have a democratic system and a socialist system. The two terms are mutually incompatible. And he goes through the reason why, which is particularly that economic decision-making can't be democratic because it's the time frame and the scope and how it's done and the avenue. It can't be democratic. The democratic process can't conceive of the variables that are necessary to make economic decisions. So economic decision-making must be authoritarian in its nature. And he also makes the point that socialism cannot be liberal. It cannot be free. You can't have freedom under socialism for similar reasons. That the scope of decision-making that socialism is required to engage in by nature encroaches on human choice. And so if you have a centralized socialist system, whether you can go to a baseball game will be determined by the economic decisions that the socialist system makes and not that private citizens make. So basically, your point is well taken, and you're absolutely right that organizational cultures are imperfect. And that is exactly why you want a market system, why you want these companies to go bankrupt eventually. And when they do things like they did in 09 and 08, where they said these companies are too big to fail, why would that be? These companies are run by bad people. They should fail. That's desirable.
But Professor, that last bit of your statement is exactly what we're experiencing now. They didn't learn from their mistakes because they were not allowed to be accountable. And that's the same thing
You're
that's
right.
carrying on. So now we're failing again. The Federal Reserve is doing the same thing again. Like there is no learning because we're not being allowed to be accountable.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm not arguing. So anyway, we're almost out of time and I haven't taken attendance, so I'm going to do that right now. I apologize. Thank you for your thoughts, Raquel. That's very good. Okay, today's May 1st already. We don't have a lot of time left, people. All right. When I call, you're free to leave. I'm sorry I dragged this out a little bit. I'm a little bit late. Farhad Abdul.
I'm here.
Hi, Farhad. Have a nice day.
Hey, Professor, this is Mohammed Ati. I'm here. I'm at work right now.
Okay, I'll note you're present. Gotcha.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. Ahmed Alcor.
I'm here.
Hello. Have a good day. Jenna Bell. Joseph Catanzaro. Jiamin Chen.
I'm here.
Have a good day, Jiamin. Janine.
I'm here.
Take care, Janine. Be well. Kermia. Is that Joseph?
I'm here, Professor.
Kermia, I got. Okay.
Wait, Professor, did you get my attendance?
Okay, I got it now. Joseph. David Esterovsky.
I'm here, Professor.
Okay, David, have a good day.
You too.
Thanks. Maud Garcia. Monica,
Here, Professor.
have a good one, Monica.
Thank you.
Alexia, thank you. Alexia. Alexia Harrigan. Kani Xiang,
Here.
have a good one, Kani. Yusuf. Yusuf Khan. Georgie Karimlashvili.
Here.
Hey, Georgie, have a good day.
You too, thanks.
Thank you. Summer Lamb.
Here.
Hello. Hong Xian Lin.
Here.
Take care. Have a good day. Hamdi,
Here.
have a good one.
You too.
Thank you. Ludley,
Yeah, I'm here.
take care, Ludley. Famita Patwari,
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Emmanuel Plamakis. Emmanuel,
I'm here. Yep.
hey, take care. Raquel, all right, Raquel, you don't have to say anything. Jishan Ruan. Jishan. Brendan's here.
Here, Professor.
Okay. Aaliyah,
I'm here, Professor.
take care, have a good day. Stacy, thanks.
I'm here. Good
Take care,
afternoon.
Stacy, have a good one. Denasia,
Here, have a good one.
you too, Denasia. Jack,
Here, Professor.
be well. Yayin, Zhang. Yixuan Zhang,
Yeah, Professor.
have a good day. Matthew Zhao, thank you.
Here.
Okay, Matthew, be well.
You
Taryn,
too.
thank you. Taryn Sander, Christian Mendez. Christian,
I'm here, Professor. I'm here. Sorry.
okay, gotcha. Janaya Pratt,
Here.
take care. Alexander,
Here.
thank you. Jack Shrem,
Here, Professor.
thank you, take care.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Okay, Jenna Bell, is Jenna here?
I'm here.
Okay, Jenna, gotcha. Marimar Garcia. Alexia Harrigan. Yusuf Kahan.
Here.
Okay, Yusuf. Did you see, I got your letter. Your letter's taken care of.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
No problem. Feel free. Okay, who else is missing? Is Jack Wu here? Jack Wu, Jishan Ruan, and Matthew Zhao. Any of that group here? Okay, if you have a question, feel free to ask. Otherwise, have a nice day. Sorry for-
Professor?
Yes, Raquel.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that I'm still submitting some of the past work that I had due. I'm still catching up, and
Good.
I'll be posting those by end of day, maybe Wednesday, with the other last fog of war.
Great. I'll look for it.
All right, thank you very much, Professor. I appreciate the
Take care.
accommodation.
All right, bye
Thank
now.
you.
Marimar? Marimar Garcia.